I stood frozen at Dallas International Airport, suitcase in hand, my stomach churning as I listened to my mother's sugary voice through the phone. "We're in Honolulu, sweetie. Why didn't you come to the airport yesterday?" Her words made my heart sink as the truth began to sink in. They had deliberately lied about the flight date. My name is Jocelyn Adams, and never in my wildest dreams did I imagine my parents would stoop this low. I had been looking forward to this family vacation for months, craving a break after a grueling quarter at work. As a marketing executive, I had just wrapped up hosting important clients from overseas, and this trip was supposed to be my reward, a chance to relax and reconnect with my family. "What do you mean, yesterday?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. "You told me the flight was today at 2 p.m. I have the text messages to prove it." The airport suddenly felt suffocating as travelers rushed by, their excitement only amplifying my sense of devastation. "Oh, sweetie, there must have been some confusion," my mother replied, but I could hear the lie in her voice. "Your sister made it just fine. We're all settled at the resort now." Of course, my sister made it. Amy had always been their golden child. I should have known something was off when they insisted on handling all the flight arrangements themselves, claiming it would be easier that way. These were the same parents who relied on me to help pay their bills, but couldn't trust me to book my own flight. "This wasn't a confusion, Mom," I said, my anger now replacing my shock. "You deliberately gave me the wrong date. You never wanted me on this trip, did you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, she responded, "Now, Jocelyn, don't be dramatic. These things happen." I ended the call, my hand shaking. Around me, families embraced, preparing for their vacations, while I stood alone, betrayed by the people who should have loved me most. The irony wasn't lost on me. For the past 2 years, I'd been sending them money every month, helping them cover everything from medical bills to groceries. They depended on my financial support. And yet, they had chosen to exclude me from this vacation. Looking at my suitcase, now useless, I felt tears welling up, but more than sadness, I felt an overwhelming surge of anger. This wasn't just about a missed vacation. It was about years of manipulation and favoritism. Standing there in the airport, I made a decision that would change everything. I'd always wondered if my parents truly saw me as their daughter, or just as their personal bank account. Growing up, everything was about Amy, her dance recitals, her perfect grades, her flawless smile. I spent years trying to live in her shadow, but I never stopped seeking my parents' love and approval. After college, I threw myself into my career, working overtime to climb the corporate ladder, while Amy pursued her acting dreams, funded by their retirement savings. Within 5 years, I had worked my way up to the youngest executive at my firm, managing major client accounts and a team of 15. Meanwhile, my dad retired early due to arthritis, and their savings had been drained supporting Amy's unsuccessful acting career. Without hesitation, I stepped in. I sent them $2,000 a month to cover their mortgage and utilities. When medical bills hit, I covered them too. Last year alone, I sent over $30,000, money I had intended to use for a down payment on my own house. "We're so blessed to have such a generous daughter," my mom would say during our weekly calls. But those calls always ended the same way, with updates about Amy's auditions or her latest headshots. They never asked about my life or my work unless they needed something. So when they mentioned planning a family trip to Hawaii, I was thrilled. Finally, a chance to spend quality time together. They insisted on handling all the arrangements since Dad had airline miles to use. "Don't worry about anything," they said. "Focus on your big client meeting. We'll take care of everything. Like a fool, I believed them. I even transferred extra money to help cover the resort costs, imagining lazy days on the beach and family dinners watching the sunset. But instead, here I was, standing in an empty airport with a packed suitcase and a broken heart. My phone buzzed with a new message, a photo from Amy at the beach with our parents, cocktails in hand. Family vacation begins. Missing you, sis. Wish you could have made it. Rage bubbled up inside me. Staring at Amy's photo, something inside me snapped. I scrolled through past text messages from my parents, and the pattern was clear. Every conversation about the trip had been manipulated to ensure I'd miss it. My mom had texted, "The flight's at 2 p.m. on the 15th. But looking at Amy's Instagram story, I saw their boarding passes from the 14th. They hadn't made a mistake. They had planned this deception down to the smallest detail. My phone rang again, this time my father's voice, stern and condescending. "Jocelyn, your mother is very upset. We made an honest mistake with the dates, and now you're making this into a drama. You're a grown woman. You should understand these things happen." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. An honest mistake? Then why did Amy know the correct date? Why did you insist on booking everything yourselves? Why have you been lying to me for weeks? "Listen here," he began, but I cut him off. "No, Dad. You listen. I just checked my bank statements. Last week, I sent you $3,000 for this trip. Was that a mistake, too? Or did you just take my money knowing you'd leave me behind?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Jocelyn," he said, his voice softer now, trying a new approach. "You know we're on a fixed income. We needed that money for the trip. You're doing so well in your career. You understand about making sacrifices for family, don't you?" My hands were shaking. Sacrifices? I've been making sacrifices for years. I gave up my savings, my dreams of buying a house, everything to support you and Mom. And this is how you repay me. "Don't be selfish," he snapped. "Your sister needed this vacation. She's been under so much stress with her acting career." "Her acting career?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You mean the hobby you've been funding with my money while she lives rent-free in your house? The auditions that never go anywhere while I work 60-hour weeks to support all of you?" "That's enough," he shouted. "I won't stand for this disrespect. You've changed, Jocelyn. Money has made you cruel." In that moment, something shifted. The hurt was still there, but it hardened into resolve. "You're right about one thing, Dad. I have changed, and things are about to change even more." I ended the call and opened my banking app. It was time to close the Bank of Jocelyn permanently. The drive home from the airport was a blur of anger and determination. That evening, I documented everything. Screenshots of text messages, bank transfers, a detailed spreadsheet of every penny I'd given them over the past 2 years. The total made me sick, $47,800. That was the cost of my parents' love. The next morning, I went to my bank and closed the joint account I'd opened to transfer money to them. Then, I called HR to remove my parents as beneficiaries from my life insurance policy. With each step, I felt lighter, as though I was finally breaking free from invisible chains. And then the messages came. First, the guilt trips from my mother. "I can't sleep knowing you're upset. This is tearing our family apart." Then Amy joined in, calling me dramatic and selfish. But it was my father's message that showed their true colors. "We raised you better than this. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." I stared at my phone in disbelief. My responsibilities to the family, I thought. What about their responsibility to treat me with basic respect? Instead of responding, I drafted a firm email. Dear Mom, Dad, and Amy, I've done a lot of thinking since yesterday. The Hawaii incident wasn't a miscommunication. It was a deliberate choice to exclude me while still taking my money. This pattern of behavior ends now. Effective immediately, I am cutting off all financial support. The money I've provided was a choice, not an obligation. You will need to find another way to cover your expenses. Do not contact me about money again. I need time and space to reevaluate our relationship. Thanks. The calls and texts flooded in immediately. My mother left tearful voicemails. Amy called me selfish. My father's messages grew increasingly threatening, warning me about the consequences if I didn't come to my senses. But I was done. I blocked them all that evening. As I sat alone in my apartment, I tried to suppress the years of conditioning that had taught me to put their needs first and to believe I was selfish for setting boundaries. But then I remembered standing in that airport, realizing they had orchestrated their betrayal while spending my money. The next day at work, I received an unexpected visit from Aunt Rose, my father's sister. I heard what happened, she said, as she sat across from me. Your parents asked me to talk some sense into you. I braced myself for more guilt trips, but Rose caught me off guard. What they did was cruel, Jocelyn. I've watched them take advantage of your kindness for years. It's time someone told you the truth. You deserve better than this. Tears welled up in my eyes as she reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. Finally, someone in my family truly saw me. Really saw me. They'll try everything to pull you back in, Rose warned. Stay strong. You're doing the right thing. 2 weeks after sending that email, I uncovered something that made the Hawaii incident seem trivial. Rose called me during my lunch break, her voice tight with concern. Jocelyn, I need to show you something. Can you come to my house after work? When I arrived, she had a stack of papers laid out on her dining table. Your father came to me last week asking for a loan. He let slip some things that didn't add up, so I did some digging, she explained. What she showed me made my blood run cold. Bank statements, loan applications, and credit card bills painted a disturbing picture. My parents hadn't just been using my money for basic expenses. They were living far beyond their means, relying on me to cover their extravagant lifestyle. Look at this, Rose pointed to a credit card statement. They took out a new card in your name 3 months ago. Have you checked your credit report recently? My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and downloaded my credit report. There it was, a $155,000 credit card I had no knowledge of. They had used my social security number and personal information to open it. That's identity theft, Rose said quietly. It's a crime, Jocelyn. I felt like I couldn't breathe. How could they do this? Rose continued. Remember that story about Amy's acting career? She's not even in California for auditions. She's been living at home this whole time, working part-time at a local coffee shop. The money they claimed was for her headshots and acting classes. They've been using it for gambling. The room spun as the pieces fell into place. The constant requests for more money, the vague explanations, the guilt trips when I asked questions. This wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Please, sweetie, we need to talk. Your father's having chest pains from all this stress. If anything happens to him, it'll be your fault. I showed Rose the message, and she shook her head. More manipulation. They're desperate because their house of cards is falling apart without your money. What should I do? I asked. You have 2 choices, Rose said. You can press charges for the identity theft, or you can handle this privately. But either way, you need to protect yourself. I thought about all the years of sacrifice, of putting their needs ahead of mine. of believing their lies. The chest pains, the tears, the guilt trips. It was all part of their game. I want to talk to them one last time, I said, face to face, but I need you there with me. Rose nodded. I'll set it up, but first, we need to gather evidence and freeze your credit. They've shown you who they really are, Jocelyn. Believe them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the dreams I had put on hold to support them. The house I wanted to buy, the vacations I never took, the savings I should have had. They hadn't just stolen my money, they'd stolen years of my life. But as I lay there, something else occurred to me. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly clear-headed. The fog of manipulation was lifting, and in its place was a steel-like resolve. They wanted to play games. Fine. This time, I would be the one making the rules. The confrontation was set for Saturday afternoon at Rose's house. I spent the morning with a lawyer, understanding my options regarding the identity theft, and then prepared a folder with all the evidence. Credit card statements, bank transfers, text messages. Everything I needed to show them that their game was over. When my parents arrived, Amy was with them. She looked nothing like the carefree girl in the Hawaii photos. Her face was drawn, guilty. They filed into Rose's living room like children called to the principal's office. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice steady. "I've discovered some things we need to discuss." "Jocelyn," my mother interrupted, already crying. "Before you say anything, you need to know—" "No." I cut her off. "I'm talking now." I pulled out the credit card statements. "Would anyone like to explain this?" The color drained from my father's face. Amy looked confused, but my mother quickly jumped in. "It was an emergency. We were going to tell you—" I laid out more papers. The gambling debts, the maxed-out credit cards, the fake acting career. Amy's head snapped up. "What do you mean, fake?" I turned to her. "You really don't know. They've been telling me you were in California, pursuing acting. That's where all my money supposedly went. Your headshots, classes, rent." Amy looked at our parents in shock. "I've been working at Starbucks. They told me you refused to help with my college tuition." The room erupted into chaos. Amy started crying. My mother tried to explain, and my father stood up, his face red with anger. "Enough!" he shouted. "We did what we had to do. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, pulling out my final piece of evidence. "You committed identity theft. That's a federal crime. I have two choices here: press charges or handle this privately. Your decision." My mother collapsed into theatrical sobs. "You wouldn't. We're your parents," Rose interjected. "Parents don't lie, manipulate, and commit fraud." Just then, my father clutched his chest and staggered. "My heart!" he gasped. "Call an ambulance." For a moment, I almost fell for it, but then I saw my mother's face. Not panic, but calculation. This was their final play to regain control. "No," I said firmly. "No more manipulation. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a repayment agreement for every penny you stole. You're going to close that fraudulent credit card, and you're going to leave me alone. And if you refuse—" My father's heart attack was suddenly forgotten. "Then I'll press charges, and you can explain your actions to a judge." The silence was deafening. Finally, my father nodded, defeated. My mother stared at the floor, her tears suddenly dry. And Amy? She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. As they signed the repayment agreement my lawyer had prepared, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, hollow sadness for the family I thought I had. In the weeks that followed, their carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. Without my financial support, They were forced to sell their house and move into a small apartment. The repayment agreement meant most of their retirement income went to paying back what they'd stolen from me. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Amy moved in with Rose temporarily while she figured out her next steps. One evening, she called me, her voice small and uncertain. "I had no idea what they were doing," she said. "All these years, they've been playing us against each other. I'm so sorry, Jocelyn." Her apology meant something, but it couldn't erase years of damage. Still, it was a start. My parents made one last attempt to manipulate me. They showed up at my office unannounced, causing a scene in the lobby. "We'll lose everything," my mother wailed, "after all we've sacrificed for you." I stood my ground, surrounded by concerned colleagues. "You lost me," I said calmly. "That's the only thing that matters. And it was your choice." Security escorted them out. As I watched them leave, I felt nothing but peace. The guilt that had weighed me down for years was gone. I was no longer their ATM, their emotional punching bag, or their victim. That evening, I booked a trip to Hawaii. Just for me. As I confirmed the reservation, I smiled at the irony. They had tried to exclude me from a family vacation, but in doing so, they had given me something priceless: freedom. 3 months later, I stood on a beach in Maui, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. This wasn't the family vacation I had originally imagined, but it was exactly what I needed. My phone, peaceful without the constant barrage of guilt-tripping messages, buzzed with a text from Rose. "They're finally moving out of the house this weekend," she wrote. "Amy's enrolled in community college. She's asking about having coffee with you when you're back." I took a deep breath of salty air and replied, "Tell her I'm open to it." The repayment plan was working, slowly but surely. My parents had sold most of their possessions, and every month a check arrived from them without fail. Not because they were sorry, but because they had no choice. The fraud charges I had held back would surface if they missed a single payment. My mother still tried sending emotional emails through different accounts. "We're eating ramen noodles while you're living in luxury. Is this what you wanted?" I deleted them without responding. Their guilt trips had lost their power over me. At work, I earned another promotion. The energy I used to spend managing my parents' chaos now went into building my own life. I had even started looking at houses, a dream I had put on hold for years while funding their lifestyle. Standing on that beach, I finally understood. Sometimes, the happiest endings don't involve forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes, they're about walking away and choosing yourself. My parents had planned this Hawaii trip to hurt me, but instead, they had set me free.